Lightning split the sky like a blade wrapped in ice. Rain came down in sheets, warm and heavy at first, then cold enough to steal breath. The summer storm had turned San Francisco's streets into rivers of gray water, and Mia Morgan's worn sneakers splashed through puddles that reflected the jagged light above. Her sunrise elder care uniform clung to her skin, soaked through from a double shift that had left her feet screaming and her tip jar nearly empty. $17 in crumpled singles. That was what the elderly residents had managed to spare after she brought them their dinner trays, their medications, their small moments of human kindness that nobody else would bother to give. She was 3 blocks from the bus stop when she heard it. Not a sound exactly. A silence. The kind of silence that happens when something breaks that was not supposed to break. Mia turned toward the curb and saw her. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, lying twisted on the wet pavement near the storm drain. Blood mixed with rainwater, running down the child's pale forehead. The girl's dress was white, had been white before the fall that left her bleeding and still. Mia did not think. Thinking was a luxury she could no longer afford. She dropped her shift bag and stripped off the only coat she owned, the Navy thrift store jacket she had bought 3 months ago for $12 because March in San Francisco demanded something between her skin and the cold. The jacket was worn at the cuffs. One button hung by a thread. It was the most valuable thing she possessed because it was the warmth between her body and the night, and she pressed it against the wound on the child's forehead without hesitation. "It is okay, sweetheart. It is okay. I am right here." The girl's eyes fluttered. Her small hands reached for Mia, grabbing at her wet uniform. Mia knelt in the gutter, water soaking through her pants, and shielded the child's shivering body from the downpour. Her own teeth began to chatter. The rain fell harder. Thunder rolled overhead like a voice that wanted to speak but could not find the words. Then the black Mercedes pulled up. It was not the kind of car that belonged on a street where the storefronts were shuttered and the apartment buildings leaked at the corners. The car was pristine, polished to a shine that reflected the lightning, and it came to a stop so smooth and controlled that it seemed impossible something that large could move without violence. 2 men emerged. They wore suits that cost more than everything Mia owned. The first man was broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale and old. His name was Sergio, though Mia did not know this yet. The second man was taller, with gray at his temples, and he moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned long ago that careless movements got people killed. His name was Enzo. They saw the stranger in the gutter, kneeling in the rain, cradling their boss's daughter. The shock on their faces was absolute. It was the kind of shock that comes from witnessing something that should not be possible. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Sergio reached for his phone, and the moment shattered like glass. A third figure stepped out of the car. He was tall. Not the kind of tall that came from reaching, but the kind that came from something inside, from the way he carried his shoulders and the space that seemed to part around him even in the rain. He wore a charcoal suit under a cashmere coat that hung like something alive, something that breathed and moved with intention. His eyes were dark gray, the color of a storm sky right before thunder, and they landed on Mia like a judgment. This was Nicholas Calabrese. He was 38 years old, but something in him was ancient. He had built an empire from the rubble of his father's brutality, had taken the old man's legacy of pain and transformed it into something worse, something organized, something absolute. He moved through San Francisco's underworld like death in an expensive suit, and men who crossed him did not die quickly. They died carefully. They died as examples. He had never forgotten a debt in his life. He crossed the 10 feet between the car and the gutter in 4 strides. His coat dragged behind him, and water sprayed from his Italian leather shoes, shoes that cost more than Mia's monthly rent. She looked up at him, still kneeling, still shielding Emma from the rain. "Is she hurt badly?" Mia asked, and her voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. Nicholas stared at the stranger's face. He saw the exhaustion there, the kind that comes from years of being ground down by a world that does not care. He saw her own uniform was soaked through. He saw that she had given the child her only coat, and she was shivering in the rain with nothing between her skin and the storm. "The hospital," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Sergio, call ahead to St. Mary's. Tell them we are coming." "Yes, sir," Sergio said into his phone, already moving. Nicholas knelt beside Mia. Not because he was gentle, nothing in his life had made him gentle. But because he saw something in her that he had not seen in 15 years. He saw someone who would sacrifice their last possession for a stranger's child. He saw someone who still believed that goodness meant something. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mia. Mia Morgan." The words came out shattered. "I did not mean to, I just found her. She was alone." "Come," Nicholas said. He did not help her up. He simply stood, and the space where he had been kneeling waited for her to fill it. "We will go to the hospital together. You will tell them everything you saw." Mia stood on legs that felt like water. She was shaking so hard now that her vision blurred. The rain had stolen every bit of warmth from her body, and her uniform stuck to her skin like a second layer of cold. Nicholas removed his cashmere coat. The gesture was so unexpected that Mia forgot to breathe. The coat was worth more than a year of her old rent. It fell across her shoulders like a benediction, like something that did not belong to her and never would, and it held the warmth of his body and the faint scent of something expensive, cologne or tobacco, something that spoke of a world so distant from hers that it might as well have been another planet. "But I cannot." "You can," he said. "You will. Get in the car." The journey to St. Mary's Hospital took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of Mia sitting in the back of a vehicle so clean and smooth that it felt like floating, with a child's blood on her hands and a stranger's coat around her shoulders. She watched through the window as San Francisco's streets blurred past, as the rain continued its assault on the city, as the world outside moved at a speed that felt surreal. Emma held her hand the entire way. "What is your name?" the child asked, her voice small and frightened. "Mia," she said. "I am Mia, and you are going to be fine. The doctors are going to help you, and everything is going to be fine." The lie tasted like copper and rain, but she said it anyway because that was what children needed. They needed to believe that someone was there, that someone had made it their job to keep them safe, that the world contained people who would give their last coat to a stranger in the gutter. At the hospital, everything happened very fast. A team of doctors rushed out to meet them. Emma was lifted from Mia's arms and carried inside, her small hand reaching backward, searching for the woman who had sheltered her from the storm. Nurses appeared with blankets and questions. Police officers arrived with clipboards and skeptical expressions. And Nicholas Calabrese, the most feared man on the West Coast, stood at the entrance of St. Mary's Hospital and watched Mia Morgan tell the truth about finding his daughter. Nobody knew yet what would come next. Nobody knew that this woman, with $34 to her name and a crumpled foreclosure notice waiting in her apartment, had just set in motion a series of events that would change everything. But what Mia did not know was that Nicholas Calabrese never forgot a debt. And what she did not know was that she had just made a vow to a man who collected on what was owed to him, no matter how long it took, no matter the cost. The rain fell on San Francisco, and in a small apartment on the other side of the city, a foreclosure notice sat on a kitchen table beside a handwritten eviction letter. 7 days. Mia had 7 days to find $85,000 or lose everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a woman with $34 and a crumpled foreclosure notice would come to meet the most dangerous man in San Francisco. 3 days before the rain. 3 days before everything changed. Mia Morgan stood in the staff bathroom at Sunrise Elder Care, and she was counting her life in crumpled bills. $1. $2. $3. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a dying insect, casting everything in a sickly white glow that made her skin look gray, made her look like someone already half buried. The bathroom smelled like ammonia and desperation, that particular stench of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with human exhaustion that you could never quite wash away, no matter how hard you scrubbed. $34. That was what remained. After 2 shifts. 16 hours on her feet at minimum wage. $34 between her and absolute nothing. She smoothed each bill against the chipped sink, the worn edges soft as tissue paper. The bills were so wrinkled they looked like they had survived a flood. Maybe they had. Maybe money always looked like it had survived something. Mia Morgan was 27 years old, but the mirror showed her someone much older. Dark circles beneath her eyes like bruises that never healed. Her hair, which had once been a bright auburn, had dulled to the color of old rust. Her skin had that particular grayness that came from never sleeping more than 4 hours at a time, from eating whatever her residents left on their trays, from the kind of stress that lived in your bones and rewired your entire body toward survival. She opened the crumpled paper beside her. The foreclosure notice. She had read it so many times the creases had begun to tear. $85,000. 7 days. Or the house would be gone. The house where her sister Clara was recovering from stage 3 lymphoma. The house where her 8-year-old niece, Emma, different Emma, not the one she would find in the rain, slept in the bedroom she had painted herself when she was 5 years old. 7 days. Mia made $14.50 an hour. When she could get shifts. Some weeks there were enough shifts. Most weeks there were not. 70 hours in a really good week, but even 70 hours would only bring her $4,000 before taxes, and after taxes it was closer to $3,000, and by the time she paid rent and utilities and the bus pass that let her move across the city like a ghost between her 3 different part-time jobs, there was almost nothing left. Nothing. She had done the math in her worn notebook so many times that the pencil marks had created grooves in the paper. Rent, $1,100. Utilities, $180. Bus pass, $80. Clara's medication, the expensive ones that insurance refused to cover, $2,800 every single month. Food, $200 if she was careful, if she ate what residents left behind, if she counted calories like a prisoner counting days until parole. $4,360 going out. $3,200 coming in. A gap of more than $1,000 every month that she bridged by borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, by taking cash advances she would regret, by accepting help from people she did not trust because there was no one left to trust. She could not afford to save $85,000. She could not afford to save $850. She could barely afford to save nothing. The bathroom door had a small window made of frosted glass. Through it, she could see the distorted shape of the hallway beyond. Empty at this hour. Everyone else had gone home. Everyone else had homes to go to. Mia placed the foreclosure notice back in her pocket and stepped out into the hallway of Sunrise Elder Care. The building was different at night. The day shift made it warm with voices and movement and the sound of televisions playing in rooms where people waited for visitors who sometimes came. But at 11 o'clock at night, after the evening shift had ended and the night nurse was already checking on residents in the West Wing, the hallway became a tunnel of fluorescent lights and absolute silence. She moved past room 14, where Mrs. Chen lay sleeping. Mia paused at the threshold. Mrs. Chen was 83 years old and had lived in her house for 61 years before her children decided she could no longer be trusted alone. She had no visitors. She had outlived her husband, outlived most of her friends, outlived the usefulness her family thought she possessed. During the day, when Mia was supposed to be doing other things, she would sit on the edge of Mrs. Chen's bed and hold her hand. Mrs. Chen would call her darling. "You are a good girl, darling," she would say, squeezing Mia's palm. "Your mother must be very proud." Mia's mother had died when she was 16. But she never corrected Mrs. Chen. Next was room 16, where Mr. Patterson slept. Mr. Patterson had Alzheimer's disease in its middle stages, which meant he existed in a kind of fog where time had no meaning. Some days he thought Mia was his daughter. Some days he thought she was his nurse. Some days he did not recognize her at all. But every time he saw her face, something in his expression shifted toward gentleness, as if his broken mind had decided she was safe. The break room was empty. Mia opened the refrigerator and removed a plastic container labeled with the date and the resident's name. Mrs. Wong, room 22. Mashed potatoes. She had not eaten since her shift started at 7 that morning. She sat at the small table in the break room and ate the mashed potatoes with a plastic spoon. They were cold and slightly congealed, and they tasted like nothing, but they filled the void in her stomach. She scraped the edges of the container until there was nothing left to scrape. The night nurse, Janet, would notice the missing portion eventually. Janet always did. But Janet also knew that Mia did not steal for greed. Janet knew that if she was eating residents' food, it was because she had not eaten in 2 days. So Janet pretended not to notice, and Mia pretended to feel less shame than she actually felt, and somehow they both managed to survive the pretense. At midnight, the bus arrived to take her across the city to her apartment in the Mission District. The bus was nearly empty. A few other night shift workers. A man who may or may not have been homeless. The line had become difficult to distinguish in San Francisco. The driver, Marcus, who had been driving this route for 8 years and knew Mia's name and how she always exited at the same stop. "You look tired, Mia," he said as she swiped her bus pass. "I am tired," she said. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Her apartment was 480 square feet and cost $1,100 a month. It had been cheap when she first signed the lease 4 years ago. Now the neighborhood was being rapidly gentrified, and her landlord had made it clear that her lease would not be renewed at the current rate. When it came up for renewal in 3 months, he would almost certainly raise the rent, maybe to $1,400, maybe to $1,500. She had no idea how she would pay it. She unlocked the door with a key that stuck and sometimes required jiggling. The apartment smelled like the microwave dinner she had eaten 3 days earlier. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through them, could hear his footsteps when he walked, could hear him crying at 3 in the morning when he thought no one else in the building was awake. But everyone in the building was awake at 3 in the morning. That was the signature of poverty in American cities. Nobody slept. On her kitchen table sat an envelope from her sister's bank. Mia did not open it. She already knew what it contained. Another notice. Another warning. Another mathematical reckoning of how much time remained before erasure. She changed into the clothes she slept in, an old t-shirt that had holes in it and sweatpants that had faded to a color that was neither gray nor brown. She lay in her bed, which was a mattress on the floor because she could not afford a frame, and she stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of the city trying to kill itself and everyone in it. Tomorrow she had a shift at the diner where she worked as a waitress. The morning shift, for hours, probably no tips because the morning customers were too poor or too miserly to leave money. Then she had a shift at the cleaning company that contracted out to office buildings downtown. 8 hours of crawling on her hands and knees to scrub floors in places that already belonged to other people. 12 hours of labor. Maybe $80 in her pocket at the end of it, if she was lucky, if someone tipped her, if nothing went wrong. And she needed $85,000 in 7 days. The impossibility of it was so complete, so total, that it had almost become funny. Almost. The kind of joke that made you want to scream instead of laugh. Mia closed her eyes and tried not to calculate the math anymore. Tried not to think about Emma, her niece, sleeping in a house that was about to be erased. Tried not to think about Clara, recovering from chemotherapy, trying to believe that life was worth fighting for, trying to be strong. Outside her window, the June night was clear and warm. But the forecast said rain was coming. A summer thunderstorm, they said. Heavy rain, possible flash flooding in low-lying areas. Strong winds. They did not know, on that night 3 days before everything changed, that the rain would be the thing that saved her. They could not have known that a summer storm in San Francisco was about to wash away everything and leave something new in its place. In another part of the city, in a mansion in Pacific Heights with windows that looked out over the entire bay, Nicholas Calabrese was having his evening whiskey in his study. The study was all dark wood and leather, with the kind of furniture that had been expensive 20 years ago and would still be expensive 20 years from now because it had never been about fashion. It had been about weight. About permanence. About the kind of things that did not bend or break. Nicholas Calabrese was a man who did not bend or break. He was 6'2" and carried himself like a general surveying a battlefield. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, combed back from a face that was handsome in the way a blade is beautiful, dangerous, precise, impossible to trust. His eyes were the grey of a storm, and they moved across the room with the kind of attention that suggested nothing escaped his notice. He was 51 years old and had been the most powerful man on the West Coast for the last 18 years. The study door opened. Sergio, his right hand, entered without knocking. Sergio had been with him for 15 years. Sergio knew when to knock and when not to. The shipment came through, Sergio said. Nicholas did not respond. He never responded immediately to information. He let information settle first, like sediment in water, until its full implications became clear. He took another sip of whiskey. The bottle had cost $340, and it tasted exactly the same as whiskey that cost $40, but the price was the point. The price was always the point. The Colombians are asking about the payment for next month, Sergio continued. Tell them the answer is no, Nicholas said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. It was the kind of voice that made men listen and comply, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. We are reducing our involvement with Colombia. We are moving toward legitimacy. Sergio's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or concern. Nicholas Calabrese had spent 18 years building an empire on violence and blood, and now he was talking about moving toward legitimacy. It made no sense. And yet Sergio had learned long ago not to question things that made no sense. He simply executed them. I understand, Sergio said. Where is my daughter? Nicholas asked. With her nanny. She had dinner at 6. She is sleeping now. Nicholas nodded and returned his attention to his whiskey. The study fell silent except for the sound of ice shifting in his glass. Outside, the weather was beginning to change. A few clouds had moved in, and the air had that particular heaviness that preceded rain. He did not know that in 3 days, a woman with $34 in her pocket would save his daughter's life. He did not know that his entire empire, everything he had built, would be reoriented toward a single person who had nothing. He did not know that he would kneel before her within 6 months. But Nicholas Calabrese had learned long ago that the future was always moving toward you, whether you were ready or not. It was always running, always pressing, always arriving. The rain was coming. The rain fell in sheets against the studio apartment window, each drop striking the glass like a tiny fist demanding entry. Mia Morgan stood in the dark, counting bills on her kitchen counter with trembling fingers. $34. 120, 2 5s, 4 1s. The money made a small sound when she arranged it in a line, a whisper, barely audible, the sound of everything she had left in the world. Behind her, on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a smiling sun, was the foreclosure notice. $85,000 in 7 days or her sister Clara's house would belong to the bank. She had already lost so much. Her marriage. Her dignity. Her sense of safety. But this house, this small place where Clara and her niece Maya slept at night, this could not be lost too. The clock on the wall read 11:48 p.m. Mia had just finished a 16-hour shift at Sunrise Elder Care, where she changed bedpans and held the hands of dying people and cleaned up things the human body produces when it is failing. Her feet ached. Her back screamed. There was a blister on her right heel the size of a quarter. She had not eaten since yesterday at this time. She would not eat tomorrow either. Every dollar that did not go to rent or Clara's medical bills was a dollar that did not feed her own mouth. Outside, the San Francisco streets were nearly empty at this hour. The Tenderloin neighborhood where Mia lived was the kind of place where darkness gathered and made homes in alleys. She could hear the distant sound of sirens, that constant wailing that never really stopped in this part of the city. 2 blocks away, someone was shouting. She did not look toward the window. The phone on her counter buzzed. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. It was always strange numbers now. Douglas. She did not answer. Instead, she gathered the bills and placed them in an envelope marked emergency in her careful handwriting. Emergency. As if there was any emergency left to prepare for. As if this moment was not already the emergency, stretched out over 7 days like a rope around her throat. What she did not know was that at that exact moment, 3 miles away in the Marina district, a 6-year-old girl named Emma Calabrese was crying because she had fallen off the steps of a mansion and her forehead would not stop bleeding, and her father, a man named Nicholas Calabrese who had spent 18 years building an empire on violence and blood, was calling for his car. The Mercedes pulled up to the curb on Van Ness Avenue exactly 47 minutes later, where Mia stood in the summer thunderstorm, having heard the crying of a child while waiting for the bus. The storm had come in fast, the way California storms do, turning the sky into a bruise. She saw a small figure on the wet asphalt, blood mixing with rainwater, running in thin streams toward the gutter. Mia did not think. She never thought about these things. She simply moved, like someone pulled by a rope she could not see. She knelt in the water, her scrubs already soaked, the stains from her shift blending with new stains, and pressed her coat against the child's forehead. Warm blood. The child's skin was cold. "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay," Mia whispered, the way she whispered to the dying people at sunrise, the people who had no one else to tell them it was okay. "What's your name?" "Emma," the child sobbed. "I want my daddy. It hurts. It hurts so much." Sergio and Enzo came first, running from the black SUV that idled behind the Mercedes. They moved fast, trained in the language of emergency and crisis. Sergio reached for the child, but Emma clung to Mia instead, her small hands gripping Mia's wet shirt. "Emma, honey, they know you, it's okay," Mia said, and something in her voice, some ancient quality of protection, made the child listen. Mia's coat was ruined, heavy with blood now, but she did not let go until Sergio had the girl in his arms. The Mercedes door opened. Nicholas Calabrese stepped onto the rain-soaked street in a suit that cost $5,000. He was 6'3". His dark hair was slicked back from a face that had been described by prosecutors as belonging to a man who had ordered at least 12 murders, though they had only proven 3. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a white line that had been put there by his own father's knife when he was 15 years old, before he had decided never to be helpless again. His eyes met Mia's as she stood up from the gutter. In those eyes was every terrible thing he had done. And also, looking at his daughter's bleeding forehead, something that had not been there in a very long time. Fear. "She needs stitches," Mia said. Her voice was trembling like a candle in wind, but the words were solid. "The cut is deep. We need to get her to a hospital now." Nicholas looked at this soaking wet woman in stained scrubs, her own coat ruined with his daughter's blood, kneeling in the gutter of one of the most expensive neighborhoods in San Francisco. She was nobody. Just a night shift worker with $34 in her pocket, about to lose her sister's house. But she had not hesitated. He nodded once. "Get in the car." Mia hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Every instinct screamed at her. Stranger. Danger. The world had taught her that men who owned cars like this owned other things too, owned people, owned safety itself. But Emma was still bleeding. The Mercedes did not go to a hospital. It went through iron gates into a mansion compound where stone lions stood guard at the fountain and armed men in dark suits moved through the grounds like shadows that had learned to breathe. Inside, white marble floors stretched like frozen lakes, and crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings high enough to contain their own weather. Security cameras watched from every corner, small red lights like predators' eyes. A private doctor was waiting. Mia held Emma's hand while the doctor stitched her forehead with practiced movements, 14 stitches closing the wound into a thin line. Emma watched Mia's face and did not cry. When it was finished, Mia knelt and kissed the top of the child's head. "You're so brave," she whispered. So brave." Nicholas stood in the doorway watching this stranger comfort his daughter with a gentleness he had not witnessed since his wife died 2 years ago. His wife, who had known what he was and had chosen to love him anyway, had been taken by cancer in a hospital bed while he sat beside her and learned, for the first time in his adult life, that money could not buy what mattered. When it was finished, Mia stood to leave. "My coat." "Ruined," Nicholas said. "I'll have a new one sent." "I can't accept." "You can." "What's your name?" "Mia Morgan." He filed it away, the way he filed away information that might be useful, the way a hunter files away the location of prey. But this time it was different. This time he was not hunting. He was being hunted by something he did not have a name for. He texted Sergio a single command before she left: find out everything about her. 3 days passed. At Sunrise Elder Care, Mia finished another double shift, her feet blistered, her mind spinning through calculations that never added up to enough. $85,000. 4 days left. The foreclosure notice felt heavier each time she looked at it, like grief was a physical thing that could accumulate weight. The unknown number called again on Saturday afternoon. This time she answered. "Miss Morgan, this is Sergio. Mr. Calabrese's associate. Emma has been asking for the nice lady who helped her. Would you visit?" Mia hesitated but agreed. She wanted to check on the girl. It had nothing to do with the expensive car or the mansion or the man with the scar. It was simply that Emma needed her. And Mia had spent her whole life being needed by people, and she could not say no to need. She took 2 buses to the mansion, wearing her only dress, a faded blue cotton thing from Target that she had bought 3 years ago. The iron gates opened without sound, like they knew her name. Emma ran to her, her small face transformed by joy, and hugged Mia's legs as if Mia were an anchor in a drowning world. For 2 hours, Mia sat on expensive carpets and played with a lonely 6-year-old who had everything except her mother. They built towers with blocks. They read stories. Emma showed her a drawing she had made of 2 people holding hands, one tall and one small, under a yellow sun. "That's me and you," Emma said. Mia's throat tightened, but she smiled. Nicholas watched from the doorway. In the kitchen, Sergio whispered to Enzo, "In 15 years I've never seen him like this." When Emma fell asleep on the couch, her head in Mia's lap, Nicholas sat across from Mia in the silence of the mansion. "You're good with her," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "I work with elderly people," Mia said, gently stroking Emma's hair. "Same patience required." "Tell me about yourself, Mia Morgan." The exhaustion broke through. She told him everything. About Clara's cancer. About the $190,000 treatment. About the foreclosure notice and the 7 days that were now 4 days and the $34 that were now $28 because she had to eat sometimes. $85,000, Nicholas repeated. His jaw tightened. "In 4 days now," Mia said bitterly. "But it's impossible." "I know that. I've made peace with it." She had not made peace with it. But she had learned to lie, the way poor people learn to lie, with her face and her voice and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Nicholas grew up in Busan, South Korea, in a room with no windows, in a house with a father who used electrical cords as weapons and locked children in closets for days. He had clawed his way to America at 17 with nothing, built an empire that stretched across 3 states, become the kind of man that people whispered about. But he had sworn that no child would ever suffer like he did. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Why would I help you? You are nobody to me." Mia met his eyes. "You wouldn't. You shouldn't. I didn't tell you because I want anything. You asked." He respected that more than he respected most things. At 8:15 p.m., Mia left the mansion and took the bus back to the Tenderloin. Outside her apartment building, Douglas Hale was waiting. 6'1". Muscular. Handsome in a way that had fooled her once but would never fool her again. They had dated for 8 months before she discovered his temper, before she saw him break a wine glass and tell her it was her fault. "Mia, baby, we need to talk," he said, blocking her door. "Move, Douglas. I saw you get out of that fancy car." "Who was he?" "We broke up a year ago." He grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "You're mine." She jerked away and got inside, locked the door, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, one of Nicholas's men lowered his camera and texted what he had seen. Across the city, in a penthouse office with floor-to-ceiling windows, Diana Whitfield read the text from her brother. Diana was 52 years old, ice blonde, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than Mia made in 3 months. She had spent her entire life cleaning up her brother's messes, making his problems disappear with phone calls and money and strategic applications of cruelty. "You need to let that girl go," Diana told him over drinks. "She's mine, D." Diana's eyes narrowed. "Then we remind her what happens when trash tries to climb." She made a call to a journalist friend and planted a story: local care worker under investigation for elder abuse. Anonymous complaint. Pending investigation. By Monday morning, the lie was everywhere. Mia's supervisor called her into the office at 9:08 a.m. "We're putting you on unpaid leave pending investigation." The world tilted. "What investigation? What are you talking about?" Anonymous complaint. "We have to follow protocol." No work meant no money. She had 3 days left and nothing in her account and now no income at all. The rope around her throat tightened. That same morning, Nicholas sat in his study with a folder opened on his mahogany desk. Inside were photographs, police reports, screenshots of text messages, dates and times, and the pattern of a man who did not know how to take no for an answer. "What do you want us to do, boss?" Enzo asked. "Watch her," Nicholas said. "Don't let him touch her." But Nicholas Calabrese had just made her safety his personal mission, and when he protected someone, he did not do it halfway. He did it with the entire machinery of an empire that had learned, over 18 years, to move like a blade wrapped in ice, cutting through the world with precision and without mercy. The rain outside was beginning to clear. But the storm was far from over. The parking lot was empty except for the sound of her own breathing and the crunch of gravel under Douglas's boots as he stepped toward her. The morning was cold, grey, the sky pressing down like a lid on a coffin, and Mia Morgan stood by her car with her keys trembling in her hand. She had been avoiding him for 6 days. 6 days of changed routes, of ducking into stores when she saw his truck, of sleeping with her door double-locked and a chair wedged under the handle. But avoidance was a rope with 2 ends, and he had finally pulled her toward him. "You've been ignoring me," Douglas said. His voice was flat, dangerous, like the calm before a gun goes off. He was 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with the soft belly of a man who drank more than he worked. His eyes were bloodshot. He'd been drinking already, at 7 in the morning. "I'm not," Mia said, backing toward her apartment building. "I just need space." Space. He repeated the word like it was something foul in his mouth. "You need space from the man who loves you? From the man who's been there for you?" The lie of it burned in her chest. There for her meant showing up at her work unannounced. Meant checking her phone when she went to the bathroom. Meant that one night 6 months ago when she said no and he heard maybe, and the maybe had bruises for 3 weeks afterward. He moved faster than she expected. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, spinning her around and slamming her back against the passenger door of a parked car. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Metal cold against her spine. His face inches from hers now, his breath sour with beer and rage. "You think you can just discard me?" His other hand came up and wrapped around her throat. "Not strangling yet. Just holding." A promise of what came next. "You think you can find someone new and forget about me?" Mia's hands flew up. She clawed at his face, at his arms, and her fingernails raked down his left cheek, drawing blood. He screamed and released her throat, and she kneed him hard in the stomach. The impact was solid, breath knocked out, but Douglas was stronger and he knew how to hurt people. His fist came up. The punch connected with her left eye socket and she saw white light explode behind her retinas. Pain, sharp and electric, bloomed across her entire face. She tasted blood. Her vision spun and she tried to run, but his hand closed on her hair and he yanked her back, slammed her head against the car door. Once. Twice. 3 times until the world turned soft and distant. His hands found her throat again. Different this time. Serious. His thumbs pressed into her windpipe and squeezed, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but feel her own body betraying her, her lungs screaming, black spots dancing in her vision like insects, like death at the edges of her sight. "You're nothing," he hissed, his face close to hers, his words swimming in her fading consciousness. "You're nothing without me. Nothing." He released her and she collapsed to the asphalt. He spat on her. His footsteps crunched away across the gravel, and she lay there breathing in shallow gasps, tasting copper and shame, her left eye swollen shut within seconds, her throat on fire, handprints blooming across her skin in shades of purple and black. She lay there for 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. The morning stayed grey and empty. No one came. No one saw. She was alone with the pain and the understanding, finally, that she was going to die at Douglas Hale's hands if something did not change. Mia crawled to her apartment building. Each movement was agony. The stairs up to her door felt like climbing a mountain, and when she got inside she locked the door and collapsed on the kitchen floor, her breath coming in gasps and sobs, blood dripping from her split lip onto the linoleum. She didn't know that 3 blocks away, in the stairwell of the apartment building across the street, Sergio had watched the entire thing. Nicholas's man. The one assigned to watch her always, silently, like a shadow that refused to leave. Sergio was already on his phone, his voice steady and low. It happened. Golden Gate Avenue. He put his hands on her. She's at her apartment now, bleeding. He listened to the response. "I understand, sir. I'll keep eyes on the location." The call ended. 60 seconds later, Nicholas Calabrese was pulling out of a business meeting in the financial district. The mayor had been talking about tax incentives for the port. Nicholas had been nodding politely while thinking about something else entirely. Something more important than city ordinances. When Sergio's call came through, Nicholas stood up without excusing himself. He walked out of the conference room and into the elevator. His lieutenant Marco was waiting in the car below, and when Nicholas got in and said one word, everything changed. Now. That word meant 12 men in tactical gear moving like ghosts. It meant 3 phone calls made in the next 4 minutes, one to an FBI contact who owed Nicholas a favor so significant it could never be repaid, one to his lawyer, one to a federal prosecutor who understood what it meant when Nicholas Calabrese asked for something. The evidence had been compiled weeks ago, assembled in careful, meticulous order. Videos taken from security cameras showing Douglas following Mia to work. Recordings of late-night phone calls, his voice thick with threats. The assault from this morning, captured on 3 angles from security cameras in the parking lot and from Sergio's phone. And in Douglas's apartment, placed there strategically, waited a cache of illegal firearms and a 2-kilogram package of methamphetamine. Insurance. The kind that ensured no judge, no jury, no sympathetic friend would ever believe his denials. The FBI raid happened at 5:19 a.m. the next morning. FBI agents in black vests smashed through Douglas Hale's apartment door with a battering ram. The sound was tremendous, hollow, the sound of a world ending. Douglas was in bed, naked except for boxer shorts, a woman beside him screaming. Agents grabbed him, threw him against the wall, cuffed his hands behind his back while he thrashed and screamed. "I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. This is a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. The agents moved through his apartment with precise efficiency and found the guns in his closet, wrapped in oilcloth. Found the methamphetamine in a plastic container under his sink. Douglas was still screaming his innocence when they led him out of the building in handcuffs, his pale body white in the early morning light, cameras flashing, news vans already rolling, their satellites pointing at the sky. Federal charges: assault with intent to cause bodily harm, stalking, weapons possession without federal registration, trafficking of controlled substances. The prosecutor, reminded of certain indiscretions from her past that Nicholas's people had uncovered, felt motivated to push for maximum sentencing. 40 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility until year 35. When the judge read the sentence in court, Douglas Calabrese collapsed. He fell to his knees on the courtroom floor and wept, his body shaking with sobs, his lawyer's hand on his shoulder useless, insufficient, a gesture with no weight behind it. 40 years meant he would be 81 years old when he got out. 40 years meant dying in a cage. Nicholas wanted him alive to feel every single day of it. Meanwhile, across the city in a gleaming high-rise office building, Diana Whitfield received a call from her company's largest investor. His voice was cold. "We're pulling out. All of us. Within the hour, I'm making an announcement." "What? Why? What happened?" "Check your email." Diana opened her email with trembling hands. Inside were documents. Evidence of embezzlement stretching back 8 years. Communications proving she had systematically stolen from her own company's accounts. The evidence was perfect, comprehensive, the kind of evidence that could only be compiled by someone with resources and access most people didn't have. The evidence was real. She had embezzled. And now everyone knew. Within 6 hours, 3 of her 5 major investors had pulled out. Within 2 days, her real estate license was revoked by the state licensing board. Criminal fraud charges followed. Civil lawsuits totaled $8 million. The society pages that had once celebrated her columns about charity galas now detailed her public disgrace, her arrest at a benefit dinner, the photograph of her being led away in handcuffs while former friends watched with their faces turned away, their backs to her like a door slamming shut on everything she had built. Diana Whitfield had spent her entire life climbing, and she had fallen from the height of the city all the way to the bottom in 72 hours. Mia knew none of this yet. She was in her apartment, her left eye swollen completely shut, the handprints on her throat beginning to form dark bruises, the pain in her ribs suggesting at least one was cracked. She had called into Sunrise Elder Care and quit. The foreclosure notice was still sitting on her table where she had left it yesterday morning, the number at the top seeming to grow larger every time she looked at it. The knock came at noon. Sergio stood in her doorway wearing a dark suit, his expression neutral, his eyes the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. In his hand was a white envelope. "Mr. Calabrese wanted you to have this," Sergio said. His voice was quiet, respectful, the way someone speaks in a church or a hospital. Mia took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount made her breath stop, $85,000. Below it, a handwritten note in sharp, precise handwriting. "For your sister. No strings. You gave your coat to my daughter in the rain. This is me returning the favor." The signature was just a letter, N. Mia's hands trembled. Tears ran down her bruised face, hot and salt, and she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but understand that something had fundamentally shifted in her world. That the man she had been terrified of, the man whose daughter she had wrapped in her thin coat on a rain-soaked street, had reached into the machinery of the world and bent it to protect her. Sergio turned to leave. "Wait," Mia said, her voice hoarse from the bruises on her throat. "Douglas. What happened to Douglas?" Sergio paused at the threshold. He didn't turn around. 40 years, Miss Morgan. Federal prison. He won't see the outside world again until he's an old man. If he sees it at all. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Mia sat down on her kitchen floor and wept, the check still in her hand, the understanding settling into her bones like a stone. Someone had moved mountains for her. Someone powerful, someone dangerous, someone who could make the world obey him with a single word, had decided that her life mattered. The rain outside her window was beginning to clear. 3 months had passed since the rain stopped falling. Mia Morgan stood in the kitchen of her sister's house, their house now, no longer the bank's, and she let her fingers trace the edge of the countertop like she was touching something sacred. The morning light came through windows that no longer had notices taped to them. No foreclosure. No eviction. Just sunlight and the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of her sister Clara singing softly in the bedroom down the hall. Clara's remission was holding. The doctors had called last week with the words Mia had been terrified to hope for. The cancer markers were dropping. The tumors were shrinking. The treatments were working. Mia set down her coffee mug and looked at her hands. The calluses were still there, deep grooves in her palms from years of double shifts and dishes and survival. But there was something different about them now. They were hands that belonged to someone who was building something, not just scraping by moment to moment. She was enrolled in nursing school. Full-time. Starting in the fall. The tuition was paid, not by her, but by a man whose daughter she had wrapped in her own coat on a rain-soaked street 3 months ago. A man she had not seen since the day his driver, Sergio, had placed an envelope in her trembling hands. An envelope containing $85,000 and a single line of handwriting, for your sister. No strings. The strings were invisible but everywhere. At Sunrise Elder Care, where Mia had returned to work after the fraudulent complaint against her was proven false and dismantled by lawyers whose names she did not know, the other staff treated her differently now. When she walked into the break room, conversations paused. When she clocked in, the manager, the same one who had threatened to fire her months ago, practically bowed. Mia had been reinstated with back pay, a formal apology written on official letterhead, and a small raise that barely registered against the enormity of what had changed. The patients noticed nothing, which was how Mia preferred it. She was still the same woman who held their hands and listened to their stories and changed their bedsheets with dignity and care. But she was different underneath. She had learned that the world could shift. That impossible things could happen. That a man with storm-gray eyes and a voice like distant thunder could reach into the machinery of power and bend it to protect someone he barely knew. She had seen Emma twice since that day. Gentle afternoons in the mansion's library, where the little girl sat curled beside her on a sofa that probably cost more than everything Mia had owned a year ago. Emma showed her drawings, terrible, beautiful, uninhibited drawings of rain and a coat and a lady who was nice to her. Mia read stories aloud. Picture books and chapter books, her voice soft and patient, while she felt the weight of Nicholas watching from the doorway, unseen, observed. He never approached her during those visits. Never spoke. Just stood at the threshold like a man afraid that his presence might damage something fragile and new. One evening, her phone rang. A number she did not recognize. But when she answered, the voice on the other end made her breath catch in her throat. Mia. It's Nicholas. Not Mr. Calabrese. Not the formal distance she had expected from a man like him. Just Nicholas, his name spoken like it belonged between them already. Would you have dinner with me? She should have said no. Every logical part of her brain screamed that she should have said no. A man like this did not invite women like her to dinner. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. A crack in reality that would collapse the moment she tried to stand on it. Why? She asked instead. Because I'd like to know you better. She agreed. He picked her up himself that Saturday evening. No driver. No entourage. Just a simple black sedan that pulled up to her apartment at 7 o'clock, and Nicholas stepping out of it wearing a charcoal suit and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his dark hair swept back from a face that was both beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The scar running from his eye to his cheekbone caught the streetlight as he moved toward her door. You look beautiful, he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, deep and solid like an oath, like something carved into stone that would not move. They went to a restaurant she had never heard of, somewhere in North Beach with old photographs on the walls and the smell of basil and olive oil hanging thick in the air. But they did not sit in the main dining room with the other patrons and the exposed brick and the careful sophistication. Instead, Sergio led them through the kitchen, where the chefs nodded in absolute silence, and into a back room with a single table, candlelight, and the sound of rain beginning to fall outside the single window. Do you own this place? Mia asked. One of several, Nicholas said. He pulled out her chair. She Saturday. He sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. The owner is an old friend. He won't bother us. They ordered pasta with fresh basil. Wine that Nicholas selected with a single nod to the sommelier. And then they ate, and they talked. Really talked. Nicholas told her about Busan, about arriving in America when he was 17 years old with $200 in his pocket and the knowledge that he would do whatever it took to survive. He told her about his father's fists, about learning that the world respected only power, and about deciding at an age when most boys were worried about college applications that he would build something that could never be taken from him. I'm not a good man, Mia, he said, twirling pasta around his fork with methodical precision. I've done things that would horrify you. Things that keep me awake at night. Things that I've done to people who didn't deserve what I did to them, just because they were in my way or because I needed to send a message. Mia set down her own fork. She looked at him across the candlelight, and she thought about Douglas beaten into the pavement. She thought about Douglas in a federal prison cell, beginning a 40-year sentence that would take him out of her life forever. She thought about Diana Whitfield, whose social downfall had been so complete, so public, so devastating that the woman was now working as a receptionist somewhere, her money gone, her reputation destroyed, her world as small and fragile as Mia's had once been. I know what you are, Mia said quietly. I'm not naive. Then why are you here? Because I know what you did. She met his eyes, held them. Douglas is in prison. Diana lost everything. My sister's house is saved. You didn't just help me, Nicholas. You protected me. You destroyed the people who hurt me. You moved mountains for a stranger who gave your daughter a coat in the rain. She paused. The rain outside the window was falling harder now, drumming against the glass like fingers tapping out a question. I'm not afraid of you, Mia said. That honesty undid him in a way she did not expect. His hand crossed the table, and his fingers found hers, and his grip was gentle, almost hesitant, like he was afraid that if he held too tight, she would shatter. His dark eyes glistened. Not with tears, but with something close to them, something held back by sheer force of will. I've been alone for a long time, he said, his voice rough. Since Emma's mother died, I haven't let anyone close. But you walked into my life in the rain and reminded me that goodness exists. That there are people who will give their last possession to help a stranger. That kindness still lives in this world. He paused. I'm falling in love with you, he said. And I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Mia squeezed his hand. Then be what you are. And I'll be what I am. And we'll see what happens. Over the following weeks, they built something fragile and real. He sent flowers to her work, white roses that appeared on her desk with no note, but she knew. She baked cookies for Emma, chocolate chip and peanut butter and oatmeal raisin, and brought them to the mansion on Sunday afternoons. They had quiet dinners where Nicholas told her about the architecture of his empire, the names of his lieutenants, the code that governed his world. She told him about her patients at Sunrise Elder Care, about Mrs. Patterson who had lost her husband 53 years of marriage and still called out for him in her sleep, about Mr. Chen who drew pictures with his one good hand and had a sense of humor sharp enough to cut glass. His men noticed the change in him. Sergio reported to Enzo that the boss was smiling. Actually smiling. Not the cruel smile that preceded someone's downfall, but a real smile, the kind that came from inside him, from some place that had been sealed off since his daughter's mother had died. Mia stood as his equal now. Her life was rebuilt. Her strength had returned. She walked into that mansion no longer as a scared girl begging for help, but as a woman who had learned that she could survive anything. She moved through the rooms with confidence. She laughed. She touched his arm without flinching, without fear. One night on the mansion's balcony, the city lights spread beneath them like 1,000 small prayers, Nicholas pulled her close. I love you, he said. I'm not asking you to fix me or change me. I'm not asking you to pretend that I'm something I'm not. I just need you to know that you've become the reason I wake up in the morning." Mia looked at the man who had destroyed her enemies without hesitation. The man who moved through the world like death in an expensive suit. The man who was trembling slightly as he waited for her response. "I fell weeks ago," she said. "The night Sergio brought me that check. The night I understood that someone had decided my life mattered enough to fight for. I fell when I realized that underneath all the power and the fear, you're just a man who lost everything and was trying to build something that couldn't be taken from you again." She stood on her tiptoes. She kissed him. The rain had stopped 3 months ago, but when their lips met, it felt like the sky itself was clearing. Like clouds were breaking apart. Like the entire world was shifting back into color after existing in grayscale for so long. 6 months later, on a bright morning in spring, Mia and Nicholas stood in the mansion's garden where Emma played, the little girl laughing as she chased butterflies through air that smelled like roses and new growth. Mia was enrolled in nursing school full-time. Her tuition was paid. Her future stretched ahead of her like an open road. Clara's scans were clear. The cancer was in remission. Her sister and her niece had moved to a safer neighborhood, to a house with windows that let in sunlight, to a life where the foreclosure notice was just a memory of survival. Douglas Hale was in his cell in a federal penitentiary, beginning year 1 of his 40-year sentence. He would not see the outside world again until he was an old man. If he saw it at all. Diana Whitfield was working as a receptionist somewhere, her money gone, her standing destroyed, her world as small as Mia's had once been. Nicholas wrapped his arm around Mia's waist and pulled her close. She rested her head against his shoulder. "You changed my life," he said, his voice steady and sure. "You saved my daughter. You reminded me what I was fighting for all those years." Mia looked up at him. "You saved mine. You saw me when I was invisible. You protected me when no one else would. You chose to be kind to someone who had nothing left to give except goodness." Emma ran toward them, butterflies forgotten, her small hand reaching for both of theirs. She was 5 years old now, and she was beautiful, and she was safe, and she had a family that would never let her fall. They stood together in the garden, the 3 of them, a family built from brokenness and rain and the choice to be kind when it cost everything. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Comment below with a heart emoji if you believe in second chances and the power of unexpected kindness. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because tomorrow we have another story that will restore your faith in humanity. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their small acts of kindness matter more than they know. The algorithm only shows these stories to people who engage, so your like and comment literally help us reach someone who desperately needs this message today. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.